What's going on, Trollomaniacs? Chris here with Telesplash Gaming, and 15 years ago to the month was arguably the greatest month in video game history. I read an article recently on Kotaku that named some of these huge titles, and my mind was absolutely blown. For me personally, 2004 was a year of transition. Graduating high school, moving to the big city, enrolling in college, dropping out of college. But 2004 had some heavy hitters, and they're games that I fondly remember to this day. So stick around, take a troll to the past with me, and we'll talk about November 2004. Starting November 1st, CounterStrike Source dropped. Now, CounterStrike was a popular 2000 first-person shooter release that required teamwork. And when CounterStrike Source dropped, it was really a remake of the 2000 classic. I have very fond memories of hanging out with my buddy's brother at Washington State University, and everybody on the dorm floor was playing CounterStrike. It was an absolute blast, defusing bombs, rescuing hostages. It was one of those times I'd never even played the game, and then I was instantly hooked on it. So CounterStrike Source coming out was a huge start to November. Following Counter-Strike, though, the PS2 hit hard with a first-person shooter of their own, and it was the first entry in their Killzone series. Now, although it wasn't hyped, it wasn't a system seller, it's still considered a very popular first-person shooter franchise for the PlayStation and spawned many sequels. It really helped Sony get that first-person shooter ground they needed, getting some of that leverage from the gamers so they can be trusted to create great first-person shooters. And for me, I remember playing Killzone when it came out. I didn't invest a lot of time in it, but it was a really cool first-person shooter experience. It didn't have the teamwork that Counter-Strike had, but it had a really cool gameplay, really cool story, and I really enjoyed it. And following that, the PS2 wasn't quite done yet, because they kept bringing the heat right out of the gate. Ratchet and Clank got a sequel with Up Your Arsenal. Now, this third-person action platformer was the third in the series, but the first to offer online multiplayer. So even though it was the third in the series, you weren't getting bored because it brought some new things to the forefront of gaming. And if you're a Ratchet and Clank fan, this was a huge release back then. And Ratchet and Clank has spawned so many stinking sequels. I haven't played them all, but I played the first few, and they've really held up. And they're even fun to this day. They still hold up now. You can pop it in, you can play it for a little bit, get your fix in, and turn the PlayStation off, or you can just grind through the game. They still hold up really well, and it continues to be a very popular franchise. Well, PC and PlayStation 2 hit. Well, where's Nintendo? I'll tell you what Nintendo was doing. They were releasing this game by the name of Legend of Zelda. You ever heard of Legend of Zelda? How about the Minish Cap for the Game Boy Advance? On November 4th, only 4 days in the month, and we got some bangers already. The Minish Cap is a great game, and don't let it confuse you by being a Game Boy Advance only game, because it brought a whole new perspective to the Zelda series, and I mean that literally and figuratively, because Link is being shrunk down to small sizes to experience the world in a whole new view. So if you haven't played Legend of Zelda Minish Cap, it's still fun. It's for the Game Boy Advance, but it still holds up, and it was very well received upon release, and people still recommend playing this Zelda game to this day. The PC wasn't backing down though at this point. Oh no, we're only a week in, but they're bringing out their big dog with EverQuest 2. It dropped, and nerds everywhere are still playing this game, and expansions are still being released. I believe they have a new one coming out from what Kotaku said. And this MMO stood the test of time, and it has one of the best horror movie actors doing some voice work, and his name is Christopher Lee. Now, most of you guys may go, who's Christopher Lee? Well, you know him as Count Dooku from the Star Wars franchise, or Saruman from the Lord of the Rings franchise. Christopher Lee had some amazing horror movies back in the day, but his voice work led to some amazing parts in this MMO. Alright, we're in the first week. We're on November 8th, and the very first day, Nintendo brought a familiar place back out in his sports title known as Mario Power Tennis. Now, this game may not be for everybody, but it should be, because this isn't your traditional tennis game. This is an over-the-top arcadey tennis game like most of the Mario franchise sports games. It's really fun, it's wild, and it's wacky, and it still has games coming out in this franchise today. Mario Tennis Aces dropped last year for the Switch, and it's a fantastic tennis game. You don't have to love tennis to play it. You don't have to love Mario to play it. You just gotta love having a good time with your buddies, because Mario Tennis is an absolute blast. But if November 8th Mario Tennis wasn't your thing, and at the time it wasn't mine, I didn't play Mario Tennis right away, but let me tell you what I was ready for. Halo 2 dropped November 9th. I was waiting in line at GameStop at midnight. It was one of the games I couldn't wait for. My cousin and I were standing in line, twiddling our thumbs, talking about what we're gonna do, and you know what? It delivered. We got home, we played all night, and we couldn't wait to get up and play some more. Halo 2 is one of those games that if you weren't there for the original release of Halo and Halo 2, you really are missing out on a piece of gaming history. Now obviously you can't play every single game, but for me, the fond memories of backing up those CRT televisions, doing 4-on-4 Halo LAN parties was an absolute blast. And I have so many fun gaming memories, but if I had to do top 10, the Halo LAN parties would most definitely be on that list. The PlayStation tried to counter the Halo hype by releasing Jak 3, the third game in the Jak and Daxter series, and while it's a great game, a fun title, great reviews, it had nowhere near the hype of Halo 2. But this game was a lot grittier than the previous 2 installments, and it brought a little bit more to the table. The Jak and Daxter series has been really well received over the years, and there really has only been, I believe, one more main game in that franchise, but they've had some other spin-offs. But if you want to play Jak and Daxter, it's still accessible across the PlayStation Network, and so it's definitely one of those, if you haven't checked it out, it's a cool piece of gaming history, definitely got to play the Jak and Daxter series. Well, Nintendo wasn't ready to call it quits yet, so they reached into their bag of tricks and they brought that babe Samus back out for Metroid Prime 2. It hit the shelves right in the middle of the month, and she was back on all of her first-person glory with new missions, tons of new enemies, and this is still considered an all-time classic today across all Nintendo platforms. It isn't that hard to get your hands on it because being popular, those games always seem to get re-released. So Metroid Prime 2 is a really cool way to experience the Metroid series in the first person, and it's pretty hard. I haven't played it in a while, but it's not one of those super easy first-person shooter games. They definitely brought out some toughness with this release. But the very next day, the PC came out with a banger, and I mean a banger. And I wish I'd played this game more. It was a game that people are begging for a sequel to this day, and that's Half-Life 2. Possibly the greatest first-person shooter ever released. Or, as some people say, the most overrated first-person shooter of all time. Half-Life 2 left its mark regardless of what you think of it. And it dropped the mic because it doesn't give a crap. People have been begging for a Half-Life 3, and at this point, I don't know why there hasn't been one released. I know there's probably some weird drama going on in the background because if there's money to be made, companies will release it. So I don't know where Half-Life 3 is. All I know is that in November of 2004, Half-Life 2 dropped, and people still talk about it. But then the PS2 was back in the mix a day later. Right after Half-Life 2 dropped, they said, we're going to give you one of these and raise you one of these. And they dropped Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. And this is one of the few games on the list that I actually haven't even played a second of. It's been my bucket list for years, but this is considered many people's favorite Metal Gear Solid game, including my fellow Rat Pack alumni, Wes at Gaming Off the Grid. It took so many great themes from the previous games and the gameplay mechanics, and it built upon those while adding quite a few more. I played Metal Gear Solid 1, Metal Gear Solid 2, I played the Game Boy version, but this is one that I now need to get into, and I'm going to force myself to start playing it this month. I own it, it's on the shelf, it's like right there, I can see it. It's right there. Yep, there you are. Right back here. But just got to get into it. It's one of those things. Next game up is really a cult classic, and it doesn't belong anywhere on this list when it comes to actual commercial success with the rest of these games, but Beautiful Joe 2 released. And Beautiful Joe was one of those, beat-em-up games, cel-shaded action platformers. It's just one of those games that you really just need to play. Even if you don't sit there and beat it and conquer the game, complete it, it's just one of those games that needs to be played. So if you haven't seen Beautiful Joe or Beautiful Joe 2, this game released November of 2004, sandwiched between so many great games, and that's probably part of the reason it wasn't a huge commercial success, but this is one of those cult classic games that people that love Beautiful Joe will go on and on all about it. And this is one that you probably need to check out. But Nintendo wasn't done. Oh no, they reached right back into that bag of tricks of theirs and said, we're done doing games. We're just going to go ahead and bring out one of the greatest selling consoles of all time. It was a tiny one. It was called a Nintendo DS. You ever heard of the Nintendo DS? Yeah, it's actually a pretty cool, pretty popular little console, and it came packaged with Mario 64. Imagine that, Mario 64. If you missed it, 10 years earlier, well, you were in for a treat because you got to play it in the car, on the train, in school. You could play it on lunch. It didn't matter. Now you got to take all your gaming goodness with you. The DS is one of the greatest consoles of all time, and Mario 64, in my opinion, is one of my favorite Mario games of all time. So this was a huge release for Nintendo. But, oh man, we saved arguably one of the craziest, the greatest, the best, the worst, if you want to call it, for last. And not to be outdone, PC fans were about to call in dead to work, break up with their significant others, and single-handedly create the market for energy drinks. Never has the work industry seen such a decline in productivity, and schools see such a lack of motivation as to when Blizzard released the monster MMO known as World of Warcraft. I'm telling you what, this game was crazy. Blizzard laced this game with a couple drops of addiction, and to this day, it's still a massively popular game with incredible subscriber base, ridiculous amount of expansions, and it was so good, they went ahead and re-released this 2004 game for fans for the heck of it, and people are playing it more on that than they are the new one, which is absolutely mind-blowing to me. This may have been the first time ever that the gaming industry had their first true intervention. People were having to sit their kids down, their spouses, and go, it's you or me, because the game is absolutely crazy. And for me personally, I put 1.5 years into this game, and I love it. I have so many fond memories of it, but it also ruined other games because I missed out on so many amazing titles. But this is the year World of Warcraft dropped, November 2004, at the end of the month, and people's lives have not been the same since. Alright gamers, that does it. November 2004. Do you think it's the greatest month in video game history? If not, what do you think? Let me know down below if you enjoyed this video. I would love to cover some other months in gaming history and see what months can compare to this one. For me, looking at this list of titles, it was an absolute banger. It's absolutely insane, and it's just mind-blowing the amount of games. This month, for 2019, has also been a huge month, with Death Stranding, Jedi Fallen Order, Pokemon. I mean, it's been a big month, but man, I don't know if it can compare to that one. Anyway, guys, let me know in the comments below what you think of the video. Keep trolling, keep rolling. We'll talk to you next week.